dugsiga boardingka iyo maalinlaha ah ee Amano Boarding and Day School.
Rahim, peace be on you. Assalamu alaikum, dear students from 2 class. This is teacher Abdullah presenting you the 5th lesson about the topic of trade. So we were talking about the trans-Saharan trade. So today our topic is international trade, and the subtopic is transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trade. So the main objective of our lesson today is about to be able to discuss and comprehend about how the transatlantic slave trade started. Okay, so international trade is our topic. Saba is our topic. Okay, so what is international trade? First, we need to understand what is international trade. International trade is a trade that involves different continents. One continent trading with another continent. Two countries that are very far from each other. Two countries in different continents. So it can be different continents, and that's mostly what the case is. Sometimes it can be in the same continent. So the exchange of goods and services between different countries in the same continent or countries in different continents, that is generally the best definition of international trade. So when countries in the same continent trade one another, it can be regarded as an international trade. When a countries from different continents also trade one another, it is also regarded as international trade. And what they are trading is two goods and at the same time services. So in Africa, examples of international trade are here. So the first example is Indian Ocean trade of East African coast during 15th to 19th century. You remember this is the one we learned in our previous titles, in the previous chapters. The trade of East Africa, the Portuguese, the Omanis, and the Arabs, when they were trading along the coastal towns of East Africa, like Kilwa, Mombasa, that one is one example about international trade in Africa. The other example is also what? Transatlantic slave trade, or in short, triangular slave trade. So these are two examples about international trade. So this one was from 15th century to 19th century, and the same way this one was in the middle of 15th century to also late 19th century, almost 400 years. Okay, so now let us go directly to the Atlantic slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. So transatlantic slave trade involves two continents, three continents. What are the three continents? Europe, Africa, and Americas. Europe, Africa, and America. So Europe, Africa, and Americas. What slaves were taken from Europe, and they were taken to the Americas. When we are saying Americas, we're talking about North America, South America, and at the same time, Central America. That is the name used mostly for the term New World. If you heard the historic term, New World is talking about these three Americas: Central America, North America, and South America. So this trade is also called triangular trade. Why is it called triangular trade? Because as you know, the triangle has three triangles. So this trade has also these triangles. So this is Europe, and this is Africa, and this is what also? Americas. So that's why it's called triangular trade, because it has three different directions and three different angles. Okay, since the movement of ships across the Atlantic was from Europe. So first the ships across the Atlantic came from Europe. Where were they coming to? To Africa. And then the ships will take slaves from Africa to the Americas to work in the plantations. And finally, what would happen? The product is from the slaves, whatever the slaves produce, and some of the slaves also will finally be back to Europe. So that's why it's called triangular, because it has three different dimensions. The trade was brutal, horrible, and exploitative. So when we're talking about the slave trade, it was really one of the worst historical, experiences for the African people. So the trade was very brutal. There was no mercy for the slaves. It was absolutely very horrible and at the same time exploitative. Human beings were took advantage, were taken advantage. Imagine, even the type of slavery that Africans, they have to undergo was called chattel slavery. Chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is owning human being, okay, like property, and at the same time owning his children and his children's children automatically, or her children and her children's children automatically. So when chattel slavery was that one, the one that was applied to Africa. So in short, what is slavery? A condition in which individuals are owned by others. Human being owning another human being. Human being owning another human being. Who control where they live? Who control where they live and at what they work? Slavery had previously existed throughout history in many times and most places. The ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Incas, the Aztecs all had slaves. So this part is talking about slavery was not something new for Africa. Even the previous civilizations that existed before Christ, they used slavery. For example, ancient Egyptians, they used it. Ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, they used it. Slavery. Even Arabs, they used slavery. But this one was very horrible and cannot be compared to that one in any way. Okay, origin of slave trade. Now let us talk about the origin of slave trade. In 1441, young Portuguese explorer called Ahtan Gonçalves. He was a Portuguese explorer. He was a young man. He came to West Africa for trade. When he arrived to West Africa, he captured a man and a woman. And he presented them to Prince the Navigator. Prince the Navigator is well-known Portuguese. He was himself, he was not an explorer, but he used it to, invest in the exploration. He used it, to sponsor the ships that went to discover the rest of the world. So this young boy, he captured a man and woman from West Africa, and he took as a slaves to the Henry of Navigator. So the Portuguese are regarded to be the one behind the beginning of slave trade. By 1471, the Portuguese went down south of the coast into the Gold Coast in search of trading commodities like gold, like gold. So by 1471, the Portuguese, they came to the south of the coast, up to the Gold Coast, that is Ghana, and they were looking for gold. So they established links with the Congo king, What about by 1500, Portuguese established sugar plantations, a very big farms of sugar cane in the islands of Sao Tome and modern Gambia. By about 1532, African slaves, okay? So by about 1532, African slaves began to be exported directly from Africa to the New World. And you remember when we were talking about the New World, we said that the Americas, North America, South America, and at the same time, Central America. Okay. So this is also talking about the origin of slave trade, as you can see. So we have already stated that slavery had existed in many parts of the world. People forced into slavery, they were coming from different parts of life. They had different professions. Some of them were farmers, some of them were merchants and traders, some of them were priests who used to preach people religion, soldiers, some of them were musicians, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. So slavery was involved in all the different walks of life, in all the different professions. All those people were enslaved. So beginning, how did it begin? Shortage of labor in Americas led to beginning of Atlantic slave trade. The main reason behind the beginning of slave trade in Africa was because there were very big plantations in the Americas and there was a shortage of labor. So they needed a labor that was cheap and that could work even under pressure for many hours, who did not know anything about the land that they were coming to. So Africans were the best choice. But before Africa, there were some choice. We will see. European planters need workers on sugar tobacco plantations. So planters first used Native Americans. The Red Indians and the Native Americans were used for slaves. But the European diseases killed millions of them. So now what did they do again? Okay, by 1600s, they used it also in dangerous servants. Those who were hired, but this also did not work for them because it was very expensive to support workers. And finally, they went to the extreme. They went to African slaves. So millions were forcibly taken to America, mostly from the coast of West Africa. So West Africa is the one that's generally, enslaved the most in Africa. East, West, North, all of them when we are talking about, the one that was enslaved the most is West Africa, is West Africa. So some of them were exchanged for firearms, goods, others kidnapped on raids by traders. So some of them, when the traders come, they use it to exchange with goods. So now, for example, they make an agreement with kings. So the kings, they provide with weapons, with different commodities, and in return, the kings, they use it to sell some of the captured slaves that they had captured from the rest of the other empires that they were warring with one another. Even others were kidnapped by force on what's called slave raids. Okay, so now our title is Development of Transatlantic Slave Trade. So we are going to ask ourselves only one question here. What is that question? European power enslaved Africa because of following reasons. What were the main reasons why the European countries wanted to enslave the Africans? What were the main reasons behind that? So the main reasons behind, I mentioned it here, they are almost 5 reasons. So the first one is, what's the first one? Europeans, they found new land, which was suitable for plantations. That required huge labor. So the Europeans, they discovered a new land, the New World. We're talking about America, where there are amazingly very, very huge plantations. Sugar plantation, tobacco plantations, cotton plantations. So now they needed this huge labor, and Africa became the best choice. The second one is acceptance of African kings. The African kings, they accepted to export African slaves like Asante and Dahomey kings. Imagine, there were some kings in Africa who made a deal with the Europeans that if the Europeans provide what the African kings needed, like weapons and furniture and etc., they would also be able to provide slavery. Even these two empires called Asante and Dahomey, they became very rich because of slave trade. The other one was slavery was also traditional part of African society. Slave trade existed in Africa even before the Europeans have arrived. Africans, they used it also to enslave one another, but this one was worse. So since Arabs and Berbers from North Africa also enslaved some of the Africans across the Sahara, during the trans-Saharan trade, some of the Africans from North Africa, from West Africa, were enslaved by the Berbers and at the same time Arabs. What about the other reasons why European power enslaved Africa, beside the new land that they found, beside African kings accepting, besides Africa being part of their lives for many years? The Africans were cheaper than white laborers and American Indians. So Africans were cheaper because of they were cheaper. The other reason was Africans had more resistance to tropical diseases. Imagine, to tropical diseases. Africans, they were resistant to many diseases, okay? Like even malaria. And the diseases that used to kill the Indians, Africans were very resistant. They were brought up in a rough life, and at the same time they were brought up in a way that was very different from the other. And at the same time they were very strong, they were very tall, very strong, and they could work hard in the hot climates because they adapted. Their land was very hot. And the other one in terms of strength and health. So they were stronger and at the same time healthier. So these are generally the main reasons behind, Africans to be enslaved by the Europeans, So this is your assignment 4, 15 marks. You have to explain those terms. You have to identify 4 reasons behind European power to enslave Africans. That's teacher Abdullahi presenting the lesson. Dear students, Form 2, inshallah there will be an assignment in the Amano online website. You should write your username and your password, and you should do it only at one time. And that's all. Stay at home, stay safe. Have a blessed Mubarak. Wassalamu alaikum.